Today we will read chapter 2, pages 19 to 22 of the English reader Little Lord Fauntleroy. But before we begin, I would like to give you a recap of the previous lesson. In the previous lesson, we read that Cedric received the news that the Earl of Dorincourt was his grandfather, and Cedric had to go and live with him in England. Cedric was to be a lord since both his uncles and his father had died. Cedric was sad to leave his home and friends. He knew he had to live in England, which was very far away from America, and that he would not be able to see his friends for a long time. But his friend Mr. Hobbs told him that sometimes even the best of friends had to part. Cedric had a long conversation with Mr. Hobbs, in which he decided that when the time came for him to become an earl, he would try to be a good one. Let's turn to page 19. But there were many things that surprised Mr. Havisham. He had spent all of his life in England, and he was not used to Americans. He didn't know much about the life that Captain Errol had made for himself in America. When Mr. Havisham met Mrs. Errol in her plain, tiny home, he was surprised to find that he liked her. She was quite pretty, with a faint, sad look on her young face. Now, why did she have a faint, sad look? A faint, sad look means a slight, sad look. And that was probably because her husband had died. Mr. Havisham saw right away that she must have loved Captain Errol with all her heart. It was clear that she hadn't married him simply because he was an earl's son. So after having seen her, Mr. Havisham realized that she did not marry Captain Errol for the money or because he belonged to a family of a high social rank or status. She married him because she genuinely loved him. When he told Mrs. Errol that the old Earl wanted Cedric to live with him in England, she grew pale. Well, she grew pale when she heard that Cedric was to go and live in England because she was frightened and she was shocked that her son would have to go and live with his grandfather because she didn't want to lose her son. He was all she had. "He'll be taken away from me?" she asked. "But he is such a happiness to me. He is all I have." Her voice trembled. Mr. Havisham cleared his throat. "I must tell you," he said, "that the Earl of Dorincourt is not very friendly toward you. He does not like America or Americans. He was very angry about your marriage to his son, and he does not want to see you. His plan is for Lord Fauntleroy to live with him in Dorincourt Castle." He is referring to Cedric as Lord Fauntleroy. "The Earl offers you a home at Court Lodge, which is not very far from the castle. He also offers you a good income. Lord Fauntleroy may visit you, but you may not visit him." So what he's telling her is that the Earl would provide her with a home, Court Lodge. He would also give her money for her daily expenses, but she would not be allowed to visit Cedric at the castle. But Cedric would be allowed to go and visit her at her house. In other words, she would not be allowed to live under the same roof as her son. all because the Earl did not like her and he did not want to see her. Mr. Havisham was embarrassed. He was afraid Mrs. Errol would begin to cry. You see, he felt very uncomfortable and embarrassed because he had to tell her all these unpleasant facts about the Earl and his plans. But she didn't cry. She went to the window and stood with her face turned away from him. Then she said, Captain Errol was very fond of Dorincourt. It was a grief to him that he was parted from his home. He would wish, I know he would wish, for his son to go. Then she came back to the table. She looked at Mr. Havisham gently. I know, she said, then started again. I'm sure the Earl would not be so unkind as to try to teach Cedric not to love me. And I know, even if he tried, Cedric would still love me. As long as we may see each other, I will not suffer too much. So Mrs. Errol has already understood and sort of accepted the fact that Cedric would have to live away from her, but she feels that she would not suffer too much if they would see each other regularly. She cares so much more for her son than she does for herself, Mr. Havisham thought. She doesn't realize how hard it will be for her. You see, Mr. Havisham knows that it would be hard for her as a mother to stay away from her child, and he also knows that the Earl does not like her, so it would definitely be very difficult for her. Madam, he said, I respect your decision. I assure you that every effort will be made so that Lord Fauntleroy will be happy. So we'll stop here and we will continue reading from here next week. But before I end this lesson, I have one or two questions for you. I would like you to send the answers to these questions to me by making a video or an audio. Question number 1 is, why did Cedric's mother become pale when Mr. Havisham told her that the old Earl wanted Cedric to live with him in England? Question number 2 is, what is the name of the house which the Earl had planned to give Mrs. Errol? We will meet again next week. Till then, goodbye.